When I go to talks, I'm really good at remembering live examples. So the first point I wanted to make is here's 3 really, really large mergers and acquisitions that failed. And they're $36 billion massive companies in America that have all the people management, all the powers that be to help manage the change and look at the risk and look at the liabilities, and still they got it wrong. I won't go into too much with each one, but the Daimler and Chrysler, both automotive, one in the really high end, one in the budget car area, thought they'd be fantastic. We can hit each other's market, one in Germany, one in America, economies of scale, synergies, every box was ticked, financial, everything, except the management, the culture, the German culture versus the American culture. They hadn't decided who would be in charge, and it just didn't work. So that one alone was merged. The merger was dissolved 11 years later, so $36 billion gone. So my only point about this slide really is to say that from an SME point of view, excuse me, you need lots of heads looking at this. These people have massive teams looking at it and they still get it wrong. So I just wanted to highlight the importance of using legal, financial and insurance brokers and work cover specialists to look at it with you and to understand the entire risk. Normally, when do people reach out to their insurance broker with a merger and acquisition? They don't. We normally find out about it on an insurance review or something like that, or they'll come to us as a transactional. So when they're doing the financial part of it, if there's a hurdle to the sale, they'll come to us and say, hey, we need warranties and indemnity insurance to make sure this sale gets done. So we're normally just part of it as an add-on, if you like. Or they involve us once the deal's done, and then we're scrambling to try and do our due diligence around how we make this work in the general insurance space. The 4 areas we look at as your broker, so a good broker, and I like to think most brokers out there are pretty good in what they do, they should look at the transaction itself, certainly, but that's only a really small part of what we look at. We look at the internal environment of not only your business, but the business. Let's say you're the buyer. We're looking at the seller as well, because as Andrew pointed out, you're only as good as what you're buying in. So it's really important that we get an understanding of the cultures of both business, the indemnities, the liabilities, basically the risk you're buying, and that's risk of all area. It may be that there's no insurance that we can buy to protect you for it, but we'll be part of the risk mitigation around that, which is really what we do. The insurance is the byproduct of what we do if we can't minimise that risk completely for you or take it out. Then we look at the external environment. A good example of that at the moment is you can probably buy a country pub really cheap at the moment. Then you'll come to us once you've bought it and say, I'd like some insurance. And then all of a sudden that bargain pub that you've bought, when you see the price of insurance in country pubs, you will fall over. And a lot of the country pubs are feeling it at the moment just to exist. So the external environment, the other changes in that are legislation. So quite often when people are selling out, they're selling out because they're aware of something in the future that you might not be aware of in that industry particularly. So we look at all of that. We're not an expert in that, but we highlight and work closely with your legal and financial people to say, hey, this is something you should really look into, or just double check. There's not going to be any environmental changes. And then the final thing we get into is the insurance part, the risk mitigation of putting a plan together with your team. So we like to work quite closely with management, not just directors, but the people on the ground, whether it's warehouse managers or whatever, to understand. And as Andrew said about the key people, it really is understanding what the people on the ground do, because that's where your risk will happen. What you're buying there is exactly what those people will do on a daily basis. This is a real example of what happened actually me as a broker. We had a transport client, 140 mil turnover, perfect acquisition. They were buying a 30 million turnover business, really similar synergies. They were so excited about it because this was a blue ribbon transport company they were buying, great reputation, perfect for their brand and exactly what they needed. Price and terms agreed. They were so excited that they were going to sell to them. And they certainly didn't want it to get out in the market because everyone was acquiring, particularly at that stage. It was hotly contested. So the deal was done, signed, everyone happy from the 1st of July. I was informed halfway through June. So then I saw the contract to sale, started to have issues with that. We started to do our due diligence. As a team, we spoke to all the warehouse managers. About 2.5% of the turnover of that 30 million was a small refrigerated goods area out of South Melbourne. We asked the warehouse manager, got our boots on the ground. This was probably early July by the time we found out that what they were storing there was a product made by Celgene, a German company, which is an anti-cancer experimental drug injected into children around the world. They were actually invoicing on behalf of the German company and sending it out. Now they're deemed as a manufacturer, so now they're selling an anti-cancer drug that's injected to children around the world. They bought that. They were 2 weeks into that. We shut that down overnight. I can't buy insurance for that, but I can help mitigate it for them. For 7 years, that hung over their business head of them waiting for a claim to come in. So if they had have got us involved, we would have written that part of the business out of the contract. Quite simply, that wouldn't have been part of the sale. So that's why it's really important to get more people looking at it and investigating it rather than just being super excited about the sale. I'll have to fly through this, sorry guys. What we do from a due diligence point of view as your broker, we basically identify and assess the risks that we see. We look at it holistically. We don't look at what the insurance products are. That's the last thing we look at. We look at where your risks are. We then work on advice of prevention and mitigation, and then we account for it, whether it be insurance or risk. It may also be surveys we do. It may be an education process with your team. And we work on that. The transactional insurances that quite often you'll hear about in a merger and acquisition are warranty indemnity, tax liability, and loss mitigation, litigation buyouts. They're all part of getting the deal done. So there'll be hurdles, like a buyer might be concerned about any unknown taxes that might come back to bite them. So you can get tax liability to make sure you get rid of that concern and you can make the deal go through. They're pretty simple, but again, they're really targeted and designed for either the seller or the buyer. And that's the other important thing, if I didn't highlight, we don't just look at the current situation. As Stephen said, we really do go back 5 years. One of the things, if you're talking about key people that Andrew spoke about, we look at, has your CEO turned over every 2 years? Because you're loving this new CEO that's there, but he's probably not going to be there in 2 years. So what you're buying in those people at the moment is not what you think, because look at their history. Their HR history is appalling, and then that comes back with long tail liabilities that you're buying of actions against you as well. The other insurances, these are all your general insurances that we consider from a property, BI, liability, professional indemnity. We look at all of the key people. That's a really important one, and obviously the stock throughput and different. There's so many insurances we look at. That's the end byproduct of going, okay, how can we insure it best for you? And really the takeaway for you guys is that many people looking at it, I know it's super exciting when you want to sell. Most people get to a point and go, I've had enough, I'm out. You know, they've been thinking about it and then they just go, they want to sell. It's just as important for a seller to be protected, because if something comes back to bite them 5 years down the track when they're off, you know, around the world travelling and living their life, it also comes back to bite the buyer. So that litigation, Andrew, hands over your ears, the only people that win out of that are lawyers. And it's not a good transaction. A successful transaction is where everyone's happy. So that's our aim, to look at it from all areas and make sure that both the buyer and seller are protected and advise you around that. So I am now over to Jay in safety.